The two speakers that we have today are Dr. Waël Hassan, who's the CEO of KI Design, focuses on helping executives with business transformation projects, the adoption of new technologies. He's worked in various contexts, including information management, health promotion, national security, telecommunications, and banking. Holds a doctorate in privacy policy, governance, and legal compliance, a master's degree in biotechnology, and an undergraduate degree in web engineering. Received training in big data from MIT and in project program and portfolio management from Queen's University. And then our second speaker is Dr. Alex Schwarzmann, who's a professor here at UConn in the school in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering. He's the head of the department. He's also the director of the Center for Voting Technology Research here at UConn, and he'll talk a little bit about some of the work they do there. Holds a PhD from Brown University, an MS from Cornell, and a BS from Stevens Institute of Technology. And before coming to UConn, he worked at Bell Labs and Digital Equipment Corporation. So first off, Waël Hassan is going to talk about the anatomy of public order.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I thank Comcast for organizing this event and Dr. Ramesh Sabarat for inviting me, and of course the University of Connecticut for this great event. When I first started thinking about what to speak about today, I realized that probably a lot of these bright individuals over in the other room, what they're working on, they may not understand the impact or the importance of it. Obviously today we've heard various themes, and predominantly we talked about the importance of edge computing, that the computer science principles are foundational for any computer science or any security or cybersecurity effort, and that is 100% true. We've also learned about how to think about the problem differently, and that's kind of another theme that I heard today. And that ambition is really what's going to make you very successful as you proceed onto your career. I hope that the students, as they see the slides later on, they can capture some of these comments. And first and foremost, what we heard from most of the speakers is that cybersecurity is a national concern. It's a concern for banking, it's a concern for energy, for healthcare, the concern is everywhere. Today, in these slides, I want to talk about the importance of cyber power or cybersecurity on the world stage. And what's interesting is that turn the page on the news, on a newspaper, or look at a different news channel, you'll find a revolt going on somewhere. So most recently, we've heard about revolts in Syria, now a civil war going on, toppling of governments in Egypt and Libya, and repression of citizens in Saudi Arabia and Bahrain. And of course, you can see that this issue of cybersecurity has a national and an international aspect. What I'd like to offer differently throughout these slides is a couple of notes, is that a lot of the discussions today assume that the perpetrator or somebody that we're working against or we're trying to do advanced threat analysis on is actually speaking English language. I speak at least 4 languages, and I can tell you if you could decipher and decode whatever I want, I can speak in slang in one of my languages, and you wouldn't even know, even if you decrypted my laptop. But that's really the challenge of a lot of the cybersecurity efforts. So you break into a computer and you find gibberish. That's number one problem in fighting international terrorism, which is I'm going to be alluding to and talking about. And the second thing is that I want to offer differently from your speakers is that privacy is really a paramount concern. And I know in the US it's a little bit different. We talk about cybersecurity as an over-encompassing factor, but when we kind of include privacy in that, and I will talk about examples today that show you that really if we protect citizen privacy, that we're achieving national security and not the other way around. I think these are these kind of two of the main points. And, you know, of course, that the impact is international over of what, you know, these brilliant individuals are doing. So in Sochi Olympics, when the international athletes landed in the airport in Russia, their phones were hacked within 4 minutes. That's real. And of course, you know, the Russians thinking, yeah, there must be intelligence or spies or infiltrating throughout that events. And that's really remarkable to see how fast any phone can be hacked save BlackBerry, and maybe, I'm not sure if there's enough of those devices lying around somewhere. Viber, WhatsApp, Twitter are commonly used to locate terrorist targets in Syria. And that's the other common thing I want to talk about is a lot of terrorism activity goes on unencrypted. They're literally posting it on Facebook and Twitter. And that's another challenge which I want to commend Dr. Elena for speaking about. This is that you really need analytics. So cybersecurity is not so much about encryption. It's, I would say 80% of it is analytics, because if you don't understand what's going on in the Twitter space and in the Facebook space and all these social media spaces, you might as well, shut down business if you're trying to fight international terrorism. Other examples of governments, state governments, I want to mention, I don't want to make this a political talk, but I will mention some examples where countries are actually hiring individuals to create fake Twitter accounts to influence public opinion. And if you want to test that, just type something negative about the Saudi Arabian government and you'll see how many attacks you'll get within minutes. They have bots and they have humans manning these bots and hundreds of people working at that day in, day and night. Just type any women issue, driving women in Saudi, and then you'll see these guys either attacking you, following you, and their Twitter accounts, they're within a day old. And they will die a day later. So just do some analysis, and a professor in Germany did that, where you see that the states are really abusing the cyberspace. Kuwait most recently issued a mandatory DNA collection from all of its residents, so citizens, non-citizens. And guess what that means? A lot of children who don't know who their fathers are going to show up right now, because the DNA samples will tell you the truth, right? So latest is China, Russia, and also Iran are working on their own internet. Basically, it's their own version of kosher internet that they allow their citizens to play in. So you'll see that there's a lot of examples in which this cyber warfare is really very impactful. And the battlefield is the space of every single one of these applications. Of course, you hear about WhatsApp end-to-end encryption. You hear about Facebook's encrypted secure messaging. But they all rely on centralized mechanisms for encryption or identification or validation. The issue is that any centralized system can be hacked, and I would say rather easily. Because, ask any system administrator, and I see a lot of companies, I say, where do you store your private keys? It's always on the administrator's Mac, thinking that's safe, in clear text. And when I ask that question, they literally hide away they hold their, no word of a lie. One guy held his laptop close to him, because he thought I was going to take it away, because my role was an auditor, right? So really, that kind of tells you about the security and cybersecurity culture that is going on. So obviously, there's a lot of mass distrust in government. And, I want to just speak about Snowden for 30 seconds here. Somebody may argue that a lot of the revolts in the Middle East really happened because these leaders lost faith with their citizens. They were always vilifying the US in their mass media, and they realized that a lot of them were either, were getting direct orders from the embassies or whatnot. And when Snowden uncovered that, then that really caused a lot of death. So I don't know whether, you can speak about Snowden as in that's a great, freedom fighter, or really an agent of supporting or helping, causing wars and whatnot. So really, when we talk about security, and it could be an email server, or without hinting at any candidates, or a encrypted email by an ambassador or somebody, the small talk that goes on in the US embassies abroad is actually mind-boggling. And just spend 5 minutes reading WikiLeaks, and you'll find the level of details that these scripts hold, and level of what I would call state secrets, and they're really very important to hold. So on the other hand, you're finding that state actors are trying to influence elections by, for example, hacking the DNC servers. There's a lot of state activity going on both sides, and what's said in the media is often kind of a byproduct. The Yahoo, for example, breach is 2 years old, right? It didn't happen yesterday. There's companies who are willfully breaching people's privacy, and that's only coming along or showing up in the media once it gets reported. So that leads me to say one thing, that really there isn't something called cyber power. It's really about power and the ability to predict, and that's using analytics, secure, of course, using all the encryption methods, disrupt, and that really is about the control of the networks, control and defend. I think these are the 5 principles in my perspective on how to look at cybersecurity. And you'll see really it's about world order. It's really about keeping citizens at least trying to control the issues that may cause wars. So in this slide, and hopefully it's clear, I think I have a pointer here. Basically, on the right-hand side, you've got policing agencies, local police, intelligence agencies, and international organizations, right? On the left-hand side, you've got privacy advocates, civil libertarians, and the general public. On the right-hand side, you'll see people wanting security, and they want to preserve national security. On the left-hand side, you see people who are advocates of privacy. And that's created a tug of war between a lot of us, I would say, were more on the security side in this room, but there's a lot of privacy advocates out there who think that governments aren't good, or there's always a bad guy, or your neighbor may find out, and that's creating a lot of tension. So hopefully, once you have access to these slides, you'll see it, is that there is, world organizations, they want a surveillance world, the 5 eyes, the mass sharing between governments, surveillance states where a state can know everything about its citizen. Examples, some countries in the Middle East. Policing agencies also want to issue warrants to unlock your computers, right? And on the right-hand side of this, when you hear the words that are called balancing privacy and security, I'll come to that in a second. On the left, some people, on the left side, really, real political left, they want complete anonymity, because they believe that that's a sort of an amendment right in whatever country they're in. Some advocates want complete privacy, and some people want control. The biggest problem that we're finding these days is that a lot of people are advocating for balancing privacy and security. And the one message that I want you to leave with today is that there's nothing so-called as balancing privacy and security, because you're actually to defeat both. Balancing privacy and security really means that you get just enough privacy, and we've got the keys. Now, what if the keys were in the hands of somebody called Edward? You know what's going to happen. So the issue of share with us and trust us really doesn't really go very far. So that's my issue, or at least a lot of the privacy advocates' issue when it comes to balancing privacy and security. What I do believe in is really what I would call data protection in design. And that really is about enabling technologies that allow people to have access to their information. So does governments. And rogue or negative, or the bad guys out there, the level of trust would be lowered down as opposed to being attacked. And I'll talk a little bit in a couple of slides more about this. So if you look at the argument, is that, people on the left, they say they want complete anonymity, Tor, things like that, things similar to Tor, right? And then the governments are saying, well, you should have nothing to hide if you're a good citizen. On the right-hand side, also some government language speaks about, criminals must be apprehended. On the right-hand side saying, we should be free, and unless if you have real evidence against me, you shouldn't be able to arrest me. On the right-hand side, you got people who are saying, trust governments. And people are saying, no, I want control. Again, this continuous battle that goes on. So how do we change the vision, and how do we look at this differently? Really, and this is, I think it's probably a hopeful statement more. It's got a lot of positivity. I'm a sort of, in general, a very positive individual, and I see that part of achieving world peace is, you should ensure that data protection is going on. Now, of course, the argument is always going to be, well, do we protect data for terrorists, right? That's going to be the counter argument. But in the world that I see in which our governments are successful in doing their job and our citizens feel protected, is that citizens need to have the ability to express their opinions, desires, even change the system, criticize government. Meanwhile, the risk to national security should be minimized or apprehended. I think that's kind of an overarching goal that I have. So on achieving both outcomes, as I said earlier, it's not about balance, because you can never achieve that. A lot of the arguments around balance stem from the fact that, I'll give you an example. In the Toronto, I'm from Toronto, by the way, the Toronto subway system, there's cameras everywhere. All the images are blurred for most of the staff looking at the subway, with the exception of a couple of individuals throughout the process. Again, the question goes, who are these individuals, right? Do they represent their proper interests? Are they being monitored? Are we using predictive analytics? So holding the keys in a localized location is actually a bit of it's an oxymoron, because these guys could be the bad guys. Every time you trust in somebody, I mean, I've got a security clearance. I can travel anywhere I want, but there's nothing preventing somebody else from, tacking somebody on me to kind of, help monitor who I'm talking to, what I'm talking to. Usually, we actually unplug the batteries if we're talking to somebody of importance to ensure that that doesn't happen. But anywho, the other thing that security folks haven't really mastered or haven't really thought about is deterrence. A lot of some states are thinking that we could have secret laws to monitor citizens secretly that will help the end state. But the truth is that the fact that people know that they're being monitored is a lot stronger than what you're doing. So in the hospital landscape, for example, I work with a company called Mesa Analytics, a partner of mine, and they do audit analytics. The minute the hospital announces that now we're tracking your actions, whether the system is working or not, people will stop snooping. And in fact, this protects politicians. In fact, at least a couple of the presidential candidates in the last few years, a couple of elections, they actually hospitalized in Toronto. You know why? Because they don't want people in America finding out what the diseases they've got. And they do it very frequently. And employees in those hospitals, every single time, they open up their records. Almost every time. You will never hear about this in the news, but it's a fact. So really having the systems in place and the communication to the employees really tells you that you can't do that. There was a nurse that just a few weeks ago, almost retirement age, lost her pension because she opened up the infamous Toronto, now deceased mayor, who was most of the time on crack, and she opened up his record. His name is Rob Ford. So within 20 minutes that Rob Ford was admitted to the hospital for cancer, 20 people opened up his record. One person got convicted, and the rest, had the different, penalties and whatnot. So really, why? Because Mount Sinai doesn't have any audit systems, and people think that they can do whatever they want. The other thing is that informed individuals' ability for people to believe that if they make an access request to the government, they will get accurate and complete records, that really raises confidence in governments. And that really helps in your other initiatives. Then when you say you're the good guy, that means the people will trust you more. So governments really can rely on public's trust by positively reinforcing that trust to say, we're trustworthy. If you ask us for information, we'll tell you. No secret laws, no secret records, no secret investigations. At least in the privacy, maybe dream that I have. and of course, we employ a lot of encryption. Not all of us, not all of our companies or our clients, but not a lot of people employ anonymization. A great example a few minutes ago was mentioned is that we de-identify that data. That means we remove sensitive information. That should be a practice across your organization. Your teller or the bank teller shouldn't know what my credit rating is. What do they care? What's their business in knowing that? So if you apply masking or de-identification or anonymization across your own enterprise, then you keep your data sort of at bay. And even if it gets compromised, then you won't really have a problem because that data is anonymized and it won't create an issue. And the last point, and I talk about terror and terrorism, really using the models of trust will help better your cause. Right now, the internet is all open. All IP addresses are almost equal. Maybe they shouldn't be. Maybe there should be a trust system based on the number of attacks, the number of hacks and whatnot. So I want to leave you with the thought that, really privacy in design or data protection by design is something that's really doable. And it's not about balancing and security. It's about achieving unison, the ability to deliver both outcomes, and there is a solution. I heard earlier somebody questioning IoT. Who would have thought we're going to land on the moon? Of course, it was out of this world. And now we are, right? Maybe going to Mars very soon. So there's nothing that's not achievable in this cyberspace. That the impacts of our bright individuals here in the universities will help our nations protect themselves and will help battle terror better. And the more we protect our citizens and the less surveillance we have, really is going to sort of improve trust in our governments so that we regain our image as the good guys out there. I hope I described this talk properly, and I'm happy to receive questions once the time is.
We'll wait for questions at the end. So, Alex? Just leave it there. Okay. Presentation first.
I think so.
Go ahead. Just put it
Sure.
in rear of the display.
Do you think that current crypto research is an ethical, proper type of research? Because if you build new cryptocurrencies, then on one hand, they can be potentially create possibilities for adversarial or criminal behavior. And on the other hand, crypto research will try to help the good guys in some sense. So what's your opinion about the field of crypto research within this framework?
What I truly believe is that nobody can stop advancement of knowledge, even if it was legislated. I think there's governments in the past that have tried to legislate lack of study of something, of any sort, and that's really never worked. So if you stop your organizations from doing crypto research, others and your competitors and then the adversaries in the world are going to keep doing that, and they'll get much better at it than you. So my argument is, you either do crypto research to understand it better, to protect better, or else somebody else is going to do it.
Okay. Alex?
Thank you. It is an honor to be here. This is my third CyberSEED, but this is the first time that I'm addressing the audience. Dr. Hassan spoke very eloquently about the delicate balance between security, safety, and privacy. And perhaps no other place stronger and than elections signifies how important is the privacy issue. Of course, in this country, we're constitutionally guaranteed that our ballot is secret, and absolutely so. Not many countries have that absolute guarantee, interestingly enough. So I direct the Voter Center for Voting Technology Research, working very closely with the state government here in Connecticut for about 10 years. We provide technological oversight to all statewide elections conducted in the state. Laurent Michel, who all of you know, is a principal investigator, as is Alex Russell. I will talk briefly about the history of electronic voting, and then we'll talk about some of the vulnerability issues and security studies that we've conducted, and we'll conclude. Some elections are very easy. Here is, I believe, the first documented election in the first millennium, and that is election of Pope Fabian in 236 AD, elected by unanimous vote. A very rare situation. Here is a painting of early United States elections. So this is 1846 in Missouri. You see the judge in the blue coat taking an oath from a citizen in the red coat, and then the citizen will cast his vote. What about privacy? What about peer pressure in this kind of a system where everybody can see how you vote? Moving a few years forward, this is the actual Abraham Lincoln ticket that was used in the election, presidential election. Slightly better. After a voter is verified as an eligible voter, they're handed a ticket, and then they cast their ticket. Of course, the name of the candidate is printed on the ticket, and all tickets are different colors, so of course, what privacy is there, right? Interestingly enough, it was the Australians who invented the modern ballot late in the 19th century. And for many years, the ballot that we're using today in the United States has been called and is called the Australian ballot among those in the profession. So you can see that there are bubbles or rectangles next to candidate names, and you vote by checking the appropriate bubble or rectangle. Of course, when you get the ticket, nobody knows how you're going to vote, and so this is a wonderful way to ensure privacy. 20th century, level machines came about, so paper was deemed to be somewhat cumbersome, and so the machines were pressed into the service. Note that this is the same machine from early 20th century, and on the right, it's the same machine, I believe, just about a few years ago, right? So it's the same machine. The problem with lever machines, of course, is that they're not auditable. Now, these work exactly on the same principle as the old school vintage car odometers, right? There are cylinders with digits, and in order to audit the election, you double check the odometer, right? And we all know how reliable odometers are. This was a landscape in the 2000s in the United States in terms of what equipment is used in various jurisdictions. It's a patchwork, and it's not a happy one for many reasons. Well, first of all, the patchwork is always going to be there because in the United States, the elections, the federal elections are governed by the states and not by the federal government. Actually, this is both good news and bad news. But some of the problems, those of you who voted or remember 2000 elections, was with the infamous and infinite recounts that followed the Florida election. And of course, there were various reasons for why the recounts were necessary, but almost nobody noticed at the time that one of the worst reasons for that is what the technology and the mechanics used in conducting elections in Florida, in many counties in Florida, was flawed, was very badly flawed. And here's one example. So this is the 100-year-old IBM card that was used in the elections in Florida. And how do we vote? Well, we punch holes in this card. And a cleanly punched hole indicates that you voted for a particular candidate. Those of you who remember the year 2000, the little dimply thing in the center is called the pregnant Chad. And it's a CHAd that sort of sticks out, but it's not clear. Is this just a defective CHAd, or maybe somebody tried to punch it through but did not succeed? And the problem is that we don't know, but the bigger problem is that the more you recount, the more votes you will discover. Because as you can see, these CHAds, they're pre-punched, and the more you handle the ballots, the more of them will fall out. And so in Florida, they kept counting and counting, and not a big surprise, they would discover a few more votes each time. So this is very, very terrible. Oh, and we all know this guy who was trying to recount these things, right? So these and several other technologies were made illegal by the Help America Vote Act in 2002. And the federal government made available, I think, close to $4 billion with a B dollars of funding for the states to modernize their equipment. And so a feeding frenzy began around the year 2003, and states started spending money very, very quickly. Unfortunately, many vendors jumped and they jumped to the market prematurely with immature technology. And one could say, well, how difficult it is to add a couple of votes together? Well, it turns out it's a non-trivial problem if you want to guarantee both privacy and safety and security at the same time. The two most prevalent technologies in use today are the touchscreen direct recording electronic devices on the left and the paper ballot devices. After 2000, many people jumped to conclusions that paper is evil. And many states bought into this idea that you should be running elections on a paperless machine, such as the one here on the left. The problem is that it is impossible to audit such elections. You never know whether a machine was operating correctly. And because there is no primary evidence that any human being ever voted on this machine, we depend on the machine to self-audit. And anybody who knows about auditing knows that self-auditing is a very, very nasty idea. So you can ask the machine who won the election, and the machine says, well, it's 10-7. Well, could you double check? Well, of course, it's 10-7. What would you like to know? Right? Optical scan tabulation does not appear to be as attractive in the 21st century. However, it is the safest technology known today to conduct elections because precisely, well, something is supposed to happen. All right, there we go. Yeah. Because of the voter-generated paper ballot. Whenever there is any concern about the technology, we can always resort to recounting by hand the paper ballots, which is known as software independence, that you do not need to rely on technology to double-check machines which may be faulty or compromised because of security concerns. So by the year 2010, the landscape looked like this. Green is the paper ballot optical scan, and the tan areas are touchscreen devices. The tan areas are shrinking. It has been estimated that since 2009, over $1 billion with a B dollars worth of touchscreen machines have been scrapped by the states because of the problems with technology. Maryland is being the latest state to scrap its $76 million worth installation that they bought without thinking about it first. So the election system landscape is vast, and I don't have time to talk about all the details today. I'll focus more on the work that we did here and some other interesting observations. The landscape has several dimensions: voter registration systems, voter check-in systems, voting terminals themselves, election management systems, and the systems that do central tabulation. It's a very difficult and challenging technologically landscape. It's a vast distributed system that needs to operate very efficiently and correctly, and also ensure security and integrity. Of course, some elections are still easy, and elections are easy in some countries. And these countries want to help us, as we know, lately, right? FBI, the most visible is the FBI announcement a couple of months ago that apparently some actors from Russia penetrated Illinois and Arizona voter registration databases. And they stole some information. Fortunately, the access that they gained was read-only access, and so the worst thing that they can have is probably the voter list, which is fortunately not such a big deal because in principle voter lists are public. Right? You can go to your local municipality and talk to the registrar of voters, and they will let you see the voter list. You know, it is available. You might even search for your name, and you might find your name online because some individuals publish voter lists. So this is not a big deal. However, it is only the tip of the iceberg. We do not really know how much foreign agents and governments are intending on penetrating election framework. So we'll talk about this a little bit later also. Now, in Connecticut, those of you who vote in Connecticut, please be assured that no Russian ever saw our database, because in Connecticut the database is not on the internet and it is accessible from the municipalities using private, physical private lines. So far so good. But really, am I exaggerating the problem? Who could possibly want to tamper with elections, right? Yes. So the attacker, the attacker may want to modify election results, obvious thing. But also violate the privacy of the voter, and force the voter to cast their ballot a certain way. Denial of service, of course. Extract receipts, either to sell or to coerce, right? You vote a certain way or I'll kill your dog. Or, where's Kazim? Hey, Kazim, give me $10, I'll vote for you. Is he here? Don't tell him I said that. A variety of reasons, right? So where do we start looking for equipment vulnerability? All of you, of course, are well versed in the areas of security and security of computer systems. Critical areas that are frequently vulnerable, bootstrapping, how does the machine wake up? Authentication, how do we know that only the right people who are identified access the system? Internal integrity, does the system have internal integrity checks? Can data be modified without the machine noticing it, or the security protection methods noticing it? Is the system correctly configured? How well is the cryptography used? Is the cryptography used? Question one. And if it is it used meaningfully? The answer is not always obvious. So without waiting and enumerating these, all voting machines in existence today in North America that were subjected to independent evaluations by labs such as ours here at UConn were found to have significant security and integrity vulnerabilities, all of them. Well, does it mean that we're in deep trouble come November? Well, not necessarily. No machine is perfect, but if you use machines safely, you may be able to ensure that integrity and security are guaranteed. And I'll talk about this later. So for the next few minutes, I'll focus on voting terminals, the voting machines. So what is a voting terminal? Well, it's it's a special purpose computer. It has a processor. Oops. So let's take a deeper look into what is inside the voting terminal. It's a special purpose computer, right? As any computer, it is replete with vulnerabilities. For example, some voting machines have evidence of internet access. Some voting machines have insecure setup that permits execution of arbitrary code. Some machines are designed, the software for the machines is designed with complete disregard of what we know about designing secure system lately, such as, buffer overflow still can be used to take over a computer system. And of course, votes can be swapped with or without encryption. Some machines have exposed ports. You enter the voting booth, you close the curtain, you stick in your USB key, and you flip the on-off switch, and you own the machine. Some machines allow you to do this. Arbitrary code can be ejected. Terminals used for email and also for browsing erotic art. This is actually a photograph we extracted from one voting machine. This is the PG version of what we found. You know, we found a lot of very funny stuff. A case study. So here's an optical scan tabulator. It is used in at least one county in over 20 states. It is not a bleeding edge system. It's a fairly conservatively designed system. In fact, a nice electromechanical system. And it uses voter-marked paper ballots. It's a computer. Here's a test report. This is a certification. This comes from the certification report for which somebody paid a lot of money to evaluate the system, including its security properties. So, you know, it passed. It passed everything, right? The first probably nationwide news event was the so-called Hursti attack in 2005. So he showed that you can take a memory card that is inserted into the machine for the purpose of the election, and you can tamper with the contents so that the election starts not with 0 assigned to all candidates, counters, but a certain negative values, right? And the machine, as you count forward, you essentially reduce that vote by that many votes. Our work with Connecticut, with the state government in Connecticut, began roughly in 2005, when our Secretary of State asked, "Is this CNN hype or is this real? That you can tamper with these cards in a matter of seconds?" So we have confirmed this Hursti attack. Indeed, the memory card contains bytecode encounters. The vendor denied that there are any programs on the card, but there is a program on the card. And there are no cryptographic checks of any kind, and so you can simply initialize counters to negative values, and the machine will happily count from a negative value. We have discovered additional vulnerabilities because one of the solutions was, well, you seal the card in the machine prior to the election, and you tamper-proof it, and so nothing can happen. Well, we showed that even if the card's sealed in, you can get to the machine and still tamper with its programming in such a way that it even withstands any pre-election testing. By the way, all of our work at the voter center is done in a pure black box fashion. We never have any access to vendor documentation, no design documentation of any kind. We don't need this because we use Laurent Michel. So our ballot attack is as follows. There is the geometry that is recorded in the memory card that tells you which bubble corresponds to which victor, with which candidate, and there is also a counter that contains the actual count. Well, all we do is we swap the counter with the coordinates, and so all votes cast for a particular candidate show up for another candidate. And we also have a time bomb to mask the attack until the election. So you can test the machine until you're blue in the face, and it's on the election day it will behave as we want. We hack bytecode. I'm not going to go into this. It takes about 5 minutes to reprogram a machine. So if a machine is left unattended for a small number of minutes, all bets are off. So, well, here are some examples if you want to count the bubbles. Another trick is to reassign blank votes. So if the election is vote for 6 out of 10 candidates, and somebody voted for 4, well, we can harvest the votes that were not cast and then assign them to the candidates we want. And again, this is not detectable. So in Connecticut, we are working very, very closely with the Secretary of the State's office, and there are a number of prevention tools and techniques that we developed. First, to ensure the safe use of the machines, to impose strict chain of custody, and also to perform technological audits. I'll talk about briefly that later. With the same machine, you can also have a complete takeover of the machine. In other words, what I've described before only tampers with the contents of the memory card. We also have an exploit that completely takes over the executive of the machine. And I should probably accelerate. I'm not going to go into technical detail, but basically it's the buffer overflow attack, right? We create a malicious string that overrides the contents of the buffer as well as the return address stored on the stack. And then when the executive tries to return from this payload code, it returns to our address, and so we own the machine after that. I also will say that the latest attack can also be propagated in a viral fashion. In recent elections in Connecticut, we determined that up to 6% of memory cards are programmed via card duplication. And so if you deposit the virus on one of these cards and somebody duplicates them, well, you propagate the virus. Even though none of these machines are on the internet, right? But the virus migrates via memory cards. So we have worked very closely with the Secretary's office, and in the last election, I believe we reduced this 6% down to 2%, so progress is being made. Here's another example, a TSX machine, touchscreen machine. Everything on this machine is encrypted, everything. We could not decrypt it. We only had it for a few days, maybe 2 weeks. We could not decrypt anything. Nevertheless, we were able to tamper with this. How? By the way, here's the result of the tampering. Before, you see Sean and David are left and right. After tampering, David and Sean are swapped, but the votes are assigned to the original counters. So the votes for David go to Sean and vice versa. How did we do that? Well, we detected that even though everything is encrypted, we cannot see anything, but there is implicit relationship between certain objects that we were able to detect, right? So we found where's the name of the candidate. It's encrypted, right? So we cannot change it. But if we simply swap the names of the candidate, the machine happily proceeds, right? In other words, the relationship is not explicitly acknowledged in the system, and the relationship is not authenticated, and nor it is encrypted. And so just play with the memory, and the machine happily votes the way we want. Moreover, machine allows you to aggregate many fake results without any check. So a couple of things. So even though machines are not on the internet, there may be a central system that is used to program these machines. And then the information propagates via memory cards from the central machine. Essentially, it's a broadcast. It's a slow broadcast, but it is broadcast. And electronic messages move from the central location to the machines. When the results are aggregated, the process is reversed, and there is a converged cast of information from the machines to the central location where the totaling occurs. Incidentally, for this reason, in Connecticut, we do not use central aggregation. And in Connecticut, we subject all memory cards, random selection of memory cards that move from the central location to the municipalities. The cards randomly arrive here, and we check the cards, first of all, to make sure that the code is correct, to make sure the data correct, to make sure that there is no extraneous code, and what is supposed to be blank is indeed blank. I already talked about risks of central tabulation. I know I'm the last speaker, and I want to end quickly.
A couple of minutes.
Couple of minutes, done.
Give
right.
us some time for questions.
So, so far I talked only about on-site voting. What about online voting? we use internet banking, why not voting? Well, there is a plethora of challenges in this area: voter registration, authentication, privacy, protection, absence of paper trail, how to aggregate, how to ensure integrity and security, denial of service, the list goes on. Let me talk about one case study. Washington, D.C. Intended to conduct an internet election, for their official election. And they conducted in August, before that November, internet voting pilot. So it was a mock election, an invitation to test the system. Here's the server in a secure facility. Here's the 24-hour security guard. You may want to ask, how did we get these pictures, right? Or how did Halderman get these pictures? So what happened is that within 48 hours, the system was completely taken over. Votes were changed and revealed. Also, they played University of Michigan fight song. Why? That's because Alex Halderman, a hacking team from Michigan, did the deed. They also detected and blocked SSH attacks from Iran, India, China, and gasp, New Jersey. Why New Jersey? I don't know, but among other things, right? So yes, if you make the system available on the internet, they will come. They took over the system so thoroughly that they were also observing the personnel conducting the election from within the secure facility where the server was located. Yes, they did bring it to the attention of Washington authorities, and they promptly canceled the election. Thank you. Ron Rivest said, electronic voting from home should perhaps forever remain too risky a fantasy. Alex Halderman's own statement, securing internet voting in practice will require significant fundamental advances in computer security, and we urge internet voting proponents to reconsider deployment until and unless major breakthroughs are achieved. Ron Rivest also thinks we're decades away from these technological breakthroughs. So, in conclusion, so yes, no computer system and no election system is perfect, but you still can use it safely if you work with technologies to make sure that vulnerabilities are mitigated. And one of the most important things is audits, right? So you must have technological pre-election audit to make sure that programming that goes into the machines is correct. You must have technological post-election audits that make sure that the programming in the machines is still correct. And also you have to have post-election hand count audits, because you must be able to recount the ballots by hand without reliance on any technology, should we so decide to do. So we are involved here in Connecticut in all statewide elections in these three areas: technological audits and hand count audits. I'm going to skip over this, and well, I guess, so electronic election systems are imperfect, and they will remain so for a long time. There will persist a dislocation between theory and practice, because many of these technological problems have been solved already by industrial and academic researchers. Unfortunately, they have not reached yet all of the vendors of electronic election system. And so auditing is a must, as already mentioned. And I also want to point out that Connecticut is one of the few states, less than 10 states in the nation, who have this level of cooperation between an academic independent research lab and the state government in safeguarding the security and integrity of elections conducted with electronic equipment. So with that, I'll stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. So I guess I'll just start out with the first question. So the types of attacks that you're talking about from state actors, we know the DoD can protect their systems very well. We know NSA can protect their systems. But how about state and local government? I mean, you're dealing with state and local governments, election systems. The election, you said, is done at the state level, not federal. How do we deal with that, with the state actors attacking systems that just aren't prepared to do it?
So the big problem and challenge in the area of security is that, especially in the area of elections, that attacks often go unnoticed. Just because somebody does not see a problem does not mean that the problem does not exist. Now, in the area of banking, banks lose up to 2% of their electronically derived revenue to fraud, to electronic fraud, but they view it as a cost of doing business. And they can see that the money was stolen. With the elections, this is not the case because of the absolute secrecy of the ballot. There is no way to associate a ballot, a cast ballot, with a human being, much less an eligible voter. So if Michigan researchers did not alert the government of Washington, D.C., and those foreign attackers were successful, well, Washington, D.C. would happily have their election in November with who knows what sort of outcome. So it is extremely important to have ongoing technological oversight. And this is what we do in Connecticut. First of all, we stay away from the 21st century technology because no matter how attractive it is, new technology is often unproven and we cannot guarantee its integrity and security. Case in point, the executive on the machines used in Connecticut is only 100,000 bytes. We have examined this executive, and we can say that, yes, there is no funny business in it. If you buy a new machine this year from a vendor, 2 or 3 order magnitudes more code in that machine, how is it possible to ascertain its correctness? So you have to have audits. I mentioned already that of course, voting machine is just one dimension. I already mentioned that in Connecticut, the voter registration database is not on the public network, right? So this is how you guarantee this in our state. But what's going on in other states? Well, I don't know. And that's a very good question, John. It is a very, very serious issue.
Sure. The challenges with any system, including the voter election system, is really knowing where your assets are, because it's not just the voter list. There's the actual papers and there's the systems that feed into these systems. So really doing an inventory of all your data assets and where they are they hosted? Are they in cloud? Are they on a computer, under somebody's desk, somebody's laptop? I think really that's the first step in knowing what you're defending before you start defending. And the second step, obviously, is you got to have the intelligence and the sharing of information with local and local, state, and even feds. I think you got to have both. You start by an audit, and then you proceed to mechanisms on how to improve and defend against attacks on these systems.
We're running a little short on time, so I'll open up to the floor if they have any questions.
Okay, now we got it. How do you ensure that the physical audits are not tampered with as well?
Well, this concept is very well known. Who audits the auditor, right? So that's why you have a separation of concerns. That's why you have Chinese wall and all these rules around how you conduct an audit. It has to be open, transparent. It follows the basic principles of both security and privacy. I think ideally, I don't think nothing is 100% guaranteed, but you can do your best to sort of at least catch the low-hanging fruit and defend against most of the known attacks.
So in Connecticut, to add to the question, in Connecticut, when the audits are conducted, and if there are significant or interesting discrepancies between machine-reported votes and the audit-reported votes, the Secretary's office does a follow-up, and sometimes we also do a follow-up. We also have developed a system that assists the hand count audit, and so this is the secondary audit that we do. And we're going to be actually testing that system in maybe 10 districts this November. But why should you trust my system, right? For this reason, we also export data that can be independently checked versus the ballots, right? So you are able to do yet another level of auditing. But who audits the auditors is a very good question. And I would not trust any system that cannot be in itself audited.
Self-auditing, yeah.
Right.
Last question over here.
Recently there has been talk or chatter about federal recently there's been talk or chatter about federal government building a central voting infrastructure to avoid voter fraud. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that because to me that's a little bit unnerving and, as a matter of fact, dangerous.
Thank you. It's an excellent question. Actually, in this case, centralization, I agree with you, is a bad idea. Because with centralization, there will necessarily be a single point of failure or a single point of security weakness, and indeed, national election could be jeopardized. But I do not believe those rumors are true. Why? Because, as I mentioned earlier, in the United States, the elections are owned by the states, not by the federal government. In fact, there exists a United States Election Assistance Commission. It's a very small office, and the best they do, they propose voluntary standards for voting systems. They stay away from imposing any standards because they're not able to do this. So yes, it's a good question, and I think, so national election today cannot be hacked. Yes, individual municipalities possibly can be hacked, but that's a much smaller scale concern.
I'll try to respond to that by just giving an example of any federal, both in Canada and the US, any federal initiative or even state or provincial, which is equivalent to a state, initiative that superimposes the technology on a state generally ends up in failure. That's just the general, because the contractors are well known, the companies that can do this work, and the delivery mechanisms are well known, and there's many ways that you find this work is being offshored to somewhere else. Lack of control, lack of understanding. Meanwhile, the paper was really good. The activities on the ground aren't. So that's kind of a big challenge.
Sir, I have a question about the absentee.
We had a lady here
Yes.
who was waiting patiently. Yes, so there are quite a few states are very serious about security. I will mention a few: Ohio, Florida, California, Alaska, Indiana, to name a few. Right? But I would say that at least half of the states do not have adequate technological oversight over the elections. It doesn't mean that we're heading for a disaster, of course, because the voting machines en masse are not connected to the internet. In fact, many of them cannot be connected to the internet even if you try to. Right? So that reduces the issue. But there are several conferences that are attended by many of the state officials from many states. And there is a lot of exchange of ideas and sharing of sound techniques to ensure that the elections are adequately protected, right?
I'm sorry, ma'am. I didn't mean to jump over you. I'm just wondering, I know you touched upon the unrealistic expectations of being able to get on the internet, but have there been any attempts to work on improving absentee ballots instead of mail?
So this is a very interesting. This is really a very challenging problem. Congress recently passed two laws. One is called MOVE and one is called UOCAVA. And both, I think, are designed to make sure that our overseas military, for example, or diplomatic corps are able to vote in the elections. The problem is they're removed from physical polling places. And so there has to be one way, some way of allowing them to vote. Now, Department of Defense today allows electronic delivery of ballots to its military personnel, but does not permit electronic return of the ballots. So, now providing automation is, in this area, is a very risky thing, right? And in fact, there is a some sort of order that says that not a single red penny of Department of Defense money can be spent even to investigate electronic return of ballots for the military. And this is because of the security issues, which are very, very, very severe. But it's a challenge. Unfortunately, today, with today's understanding of science and technology, we cannot solve it.
Well, you mentioned the Estonia issue, right? You want to speak?
Yeah, so Estonia and others, and the importance of any communication that emanates from any country in the world is susceptible to geolocation. And that means that any droid or any terrorist can find out where the locations are. That's number one. And number two, small countries that cannot even fund or support a secure infrastructure, you couldn't even rely on. Even if you're using satellite technology, you're putting your eggs in all the satellite providers' basket, and that's really very risky. So really, the communication is a major challenge.
All right, and this is final questions.
About 10 years ago, and you probably know the exact date, the DMV in this state harbored an employee who was running a nationwide scam selling Spanish-speaking person's driver's license. So my question to you is, since we are now doing voter registration in the DMV, how do you authenticate the registrants as opposed to the election? How do you make sure that the people who are allowed to vote via that DMV registration process are in fact legitimate?
So so there has to be some level of authentication that occurs at DMV. I'm not an expert on how exactly that is done locally, what proof of identity needs to be presented. So it's done through DMV, and then it is stored not in the DMV database, right? It is stored in the voter registration database. But unfortunately, I cannot answer your question about what measures they take at the DMV office itself.
A related quick story about this is that there's a guy who was a hacker who looked for people born in a state, in a province, and then they died in a different state and went back to their home state to recreate their records. And this person was able to amass hundreds of identities of dead people, essentially, and user credit benefits. So there's always attacks about that stuff.
I wanted just one interesting, this is according to Alex Holderman from Michigan, has to do with Estonia. Now, as you pointed out, the Estonians did a lot of work to secure their IT and network infrastructure. But he claims that there is a video in the internet where Estonians are bragging about their success. And if you look very carefully at one of their labs, there is a yellow sticky note on the wall that gives the password to one of the servers, because somebody couldn't remember it. And my point is that we can rely on technology all we want, but if we are not ourselves diligent in making sure that we safeguard sensitive information, then technology is not going to help us at all.
Okay, thank you. So we'll close the session and thank the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thanks very much. Nice to meet you.
Okay, so before we close for the day, wanted to give an update on the competitions.